Hello class, today we're going to take notes on the Crucible, which is going to be the last text we study before spring break. The Crucible is a play written by Arthur Miller. Now, before we start reading the Crucible, we're going to take notes on modern American drama. Some of the conventions of drama, well, there are two main types. There's tragedy and comedy. Tragedy recounts the downfall of a central character. Usually everybody dies or everybody has a disastrous end in some way or another. And comedies are very light and humorous in tone and usually end happily. There are also farces and melodramas, which are exaggerations of these two forms, that feature absurd plots, stereotypical characters, humorous dialogue, and over-the-top emotional displays. You'll often see these two images above theaters to indicate tragedy, comedy, etc. There are also various dramatic elements such as script, act, scene, dialogue, actions, stage directions, and exposition. Now, a script is the text of a play. Like a book that's organized into chapters, scripts are actually organized by acts and scenes. Acts are the major units of action. They would be the closest equivalent to a chapter in a book, and plays have as many as 5 acts. A scene is a subdivision of an act that often signals a change in time or place. So for example, in one act, you might have 3, 4, even 5 different scenes that might exist in different places or might be slightly different in topic. Dialogue is the conversation characters have with each other. Any sort of exchange in words is dialogue, and that's shown a little bit different in plays, and we'll take a look at that. Action is the movements that correspond to the dialogue, which can help move the plot along or offer insight into emotions and motivations. You also have stage directions. Now, stage directions are italicized directions. Sometimes they're also in parentheses that describe details about characters, such as when they enter or exit, when they're looking at a certain person over another person, when they're walking here or there. It could indicate setting or props. They just give details so that you have a better idea of visualizing what the playwright had in mind when this was being written. Lastly, we have the exposition, which is background information that helps the audience understand events happening off stage prior to other events or explains a broader cultural and social historical context of the play. In Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is what we're going to be reading, the script relies heavily on an exposition to explain the playwright's views on McCarthyism and the parallels he saw between the 1692 Salem witch trials and the 1954 Senate and House hearings on communist activities, which we'll discuss later in these notes. Now let's look at analyzing several of these dramatic elements. So plot is the series of related events that make up the story of the drama. To understand how Miller structures his plot, look for these elements: conflict, complications, climax, and resolutions. Now you might be familiar with this chart on the left because this is typically how plot is taught, right? You start with the exposition, you have the conflict, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. And we have the beginning, middle, and end. But in reality, not all texts have this format. You can have more peaks and lows than what is depicted here, but this is generally what we indicate as the highs and lows. Now, conflict is a struggle between opposing forces. In Act 1, local and personal conflicts escalate into a major widespread conflict. So look for what are the conflicts in Act 1. Complications are additional problems that make the conflict more difficult to resolve. Think about a complication in a plan that you have, right? There's something that's impeding on your ability to just do the thing that you had planned. In Act 2, several events occur that add intensity, several complications to this whole story. Now, the climax is the point of highest tension or excitement. When you're trying to identify the climax of a story or a play in general, sometimes in plays like the acts can help you, because typically speaking, the climax will happen somewhere in the middle. And with acts, if you know you have 5 acts in a play, your climax will probably occur at the end of Act 2, Act 3, somewhere around here, right? But look for the highest moment or the highest point of tension. In Act 3 of the play we're going to be reading, an event occurs that has the potential to change the outcome of the conflict. So look for this as we read. The resolution is the part of the play where the conflicts are brought to a close. Think of where things get put into a neat, tiny little package, right? We're wrapping things up very neatly. In Act 4, threads of the plot are tied up and questions are answered in this particular play. Your resolution typically happens the last couple chapters of a book or the last act of a play if that's what you're reading. Sometimes even the last scenes. It doesn't have to be the whole act. As you read, notice how dramatic elements such as dialogue, stage directions, and exposition advance the plot and develop theme. Analyzing characters and motivations. Character traits, relationships, and motivations, reason for behavior, are revealed through either indirect or direct characterization. Direct characterization is where specific details about a character are stated explicitly. So the person or the author will come out and tell you he wore a blue shirt and was very motivated to work. Indirect characterization is when readers have to infer what a character is like based on clues from the text. So based on what other people say about that person or the observations, like perhaps, the author observes them doing something and depicts them like as they work in the garden, right? And that is supposed to give you clues about what this person is like. When you're talking about motivation, there are actually 2 different types of motivation. There's intrinsic and extrinsic. So if somebody is intrinsically motivated, they're motivated by things that come from within themselves, like pride, interest, curiosity. If somebody is extrinsically motivated, that means something on the outside is motivating them to do work. So getting good grades, there's a punishment attached, there's money attached, or praise. These are all examples of extrinsic motivation. Now with plays, you also have stage directions. Now stage directions most of the time provide clues about a character, but you should look closely at what characters say, aka their dialogue, and how they behave, their actions. So the picture on the left here indicates, maybe in the script it'll say, stage left or right center or upstage left, right? These are what the different areas of the stage are called, and it's possible when a play is being performed that you have multiple groups of people on stage at the same time, but they're not delivering the same dialogue. They're not talking to each other. They're talking to their own little cliques, right? And it totally depends on the play. I don't believe there are any examples of this in the Crucible, but there are examples in other plays. So if we ever go to see one post-COVID time, be aware of this thing. In the Crucible, Miller incorporates 3 types of characters. As you read, note which characters fulfill these roles and how their interactions impact events. The protagonist, which is the central character of the play. This character is at the center of the conflict and often undergoes radical changes during the course of the play. The antagonist often opposes the protagonist, giving rise to the central conflict of the play. And foils. A foil is a minor character who provides a striking contrast to another character, thus emphasizing the other character's traits. So this will be somebody that has a lot of the same opportunities that the other character has, but they're a little bit different. For example, let's say the main character is handsome and well put together. His foil might be handsome and disheveled, so like not completely put together. If the main character is kind and good, then the foil would be good, but mostly only to one person or with some exceptions, right? If the main character is moral and honorable, then the foil might be complacent or confused, right? So they'll be similar in some ways, but there will be stark contrasts also. So typically you have a foil of your protagonist. So once you determine who the protagonist is, start to consider who might be a foil of our protagonist. Throughout the play, main characters face moral dilemmas. Moral dilemmas are situations in which there is a difficult choice between two courses of action. As you read, think about what motivations influence a character's choice or a character's choices when he or she is faced with a moral dilemma. What impact do these choices have on the plot and the theme of the play? In general, there are a few genre elements of drama. It's meant to be performed in front of an audience, and it's meant to be read out loud. I'm going to go ahead and add that through there, because if you read a play by yourself and it's complete dialogue, there's not a lot of narration like there would be in a novel, it can be very difficult to kind of grasp what's going on. And so seeing it and reading it are two completely different things. They use stage directions to describe characters, actions, setting, and mood. And they use dialogue to move the plot forward and convey the concerns of characters. A lot of things that you would have to infer in a book will be overtly stated in dialogue, or at least more obviously hinted at via dialogue, just because of the nature of what's going on. Again, typically you're seeing this performed. In our case, we're going to be reading it, but we might, if we have time, view clips of the film adaptation. Let's look at analyzing several literary devices. The first one is allegory, which is a work of literal level of meaning and a symbolic one as well. So the characters and the events represent broader ideas and concepts, and the purpose of an allegory may be to convey a general truth about life, or to teach a moral lesson, or to criticize a social institution. So you're telling a story that has both a literal meaning and a symbolic meaning. Plato's The Allegory of the Cave is an example of this, if you're familiar with it. On the surface, the Crucible is about the Salem witch trials, in which 200 individuals were accused of witchcraft between 1692 and 1693. However, Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible in the early 1950s at the height of the Red Scare, which is a scare in relation to communism. With this in mind, the play can be read as an allegory on McCarthyism, and we're going to look for more of these comparisons as we read. McCarthyism is the period of time in American history that saw U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin produce a series of investigations and hearings during the 1950s in an effort to expose supposed communist infiltration of various areas of the U.S. government. This was in a period of time where Russia and America were in a Cold War. They were very much against each other. Americans were very fearful of communists and that communism was going to come to America. And it was essentially a battle in Europe for countries to be communist or not communist. The term has since become a byname for defamation of character or reputation by means of widely publicized, indiscriminate allegations, especially on the basis of unsubstantiated charges. So essentially what was happening was Joseph McCarthy, as well as other U.S. senators, were producing supposed evidence or just accusations, really, that these people in the U.S. government are communists and communism is bad. We all know that, according to the government at this time. And so there were a series of investigations and hearings that were held in the in the Senate because, these are serious allegations, and some of them were made on things that weren't really real. So it was referred to as a witch hunt, which is why Arthur Miller made the connection between this and the Salem witch trials, which was literally a witch hunt. You also have paradoxes. Now, a paradox is a statement that seems to contradict itself, but may suggest an important truth. So something that seems impossible or untrue at first, but upon a closer look, you realize it's actually true. So in this cartoon, I'm a paradox. No, you're not. Exactly. Oh. So the person's saying I'm a paradox, but they're really not. So what they're saying is an example of a paradox. So these can be really complicated, but just think about things that don't seem possible at first glance, but upon closer analyzation, they are. For example, in order to be, there's a line from Shakespeare, in order to be kind, I must be cruel. So parents do this, right? So in order to be kind to you and teach you lessons, they have to be cruel and punish you. But typically people look at that and go, you can't be kind to somebody and be cruel to them at the same time. It doesn't work. But in this example, it does. Dramatic irony is a contrast between appearance and reality in which the reader knows more about a situation or character than the characters do. So we know something that the characters do not. So maybe we saw a private conversation, maybe, we observe something that the rest of the characters did not, so we know how something is going to turn out, but they don't know, and so they act, accordingly. And you also have figurative language. There's a variety of figurative language that can be present as usual, but this is language that is not literally true. Now, in terms of language conventions, I mentioned this before, but dialogue is a conversation between characters. Miller uses dialogue to convey critical information. So as you read, note how the playwright advances the plot through dialogue. So how does the dialogue move us, for example, from scene to scene or from issue to issue? How important is this dialogue? All right, that wraps up the notes for us. So I will see you guys in class.